welcome back to the podcast. This is my first repeat guest. Or no, I guess Jessica was my first repeat guest, but Sonia Spil is here on the podcast again. She was one of my first guests on the podcast because she is such a great friend, and I know I can always count on you for being there for me and helping me in whatever way I need or ask you for, but also you're just really fucking smart and you do such a good job of talking about what you're passionate about. And so I'm excited to have you back on for some more juicy topics.
Ooh, I love it. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to have it. I always feel like I'm like a foam finger owner of like the Rachel fan club, you know? Like I always like when you're my friend, like I'm fully obsessed with my friends.
You're all in.
I'm all in with my friends.
You
Yeah.
really are.
There's nothing I hide a body. Well, let's go. You're awfully orange today. How are you feeling?
I am really pretty orange.
Yeah.
I exfoliated the fuck out of my body yesterday. I have like a coffee scrub that I really like a coffee and coconut oil scrub. And then I moisturize because like the tan really dries you out a lot. So I'm doing a little better today with the orange, but it's probably going to take like a full week for it to like fully just like buff out. If I was competing like 1 week post show, like if I only had a week between shows, I would go harder at like using things like lemon juice or something to get it off. But it is what it is. I don't care if I look like
guys who haven't used competition tan. It is a whole nother level when it starts coming off. You look like an orange lizard. Like the way that it kind of comes off is like the spotty,
scaly.
Yeah, it's like the weirdest, most dry skin you've ever experienced in your life. It's just like massive eczema all over your entire body. So, and then it's awkward for people who don't know because you're walking around with like half orange hands.
Yeah, you wonder what they're thinking about. Like, I wonder what they think why they think I look like this.
Yeah. If you know, but if you don't, you judge.
Like, what's wrong with that girl? Like, that's a really bad tan. I wonder if she knows that.
Yeah, someone at Seattle Suntan really fucked her spray tan up.
Yeah.
Didn't prep her for it. How you feeling?
I'm doing good. Post show, like 3-4 days. I'm feeling good. I'm back at 2.5 weeks out. So getting ready for the second show and the last show of the season. Yeah. And I feel surprisingly good. Yesterday was the first day, like back to low food, back to cardio training. I took 2 days off post show from cardio and training. And then I also had 2 high days those days as well. Which was really nice, but I'm definitely ready to come in a little leaner for this next show. So yeah, I'm excited for the opportunity to just like get better.
Yeah.
And
it's
really happy with how it went too.
Local?
Kind of. It's in Texas, so it's a Texas state in San Marcos, Texas, which is like a 3.5-4 hour drive for us. Yeah. So we're gonna bring the dogs and the coffee machine and just stay on the river, which is it's gonna be really fun.
Nostalgic, you and that river. I love it.
I love the river.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Catch me up on what's like life like in Sonia world.
Life is good. I feel like every time somebody asks me like, well, what's new? And I think I don't really think anything's new, but then as I'm living my life, I'm like, this is new, that's new. Just crushing it at work, really just taking on a new position. So I'll be, I guess I can kind of semi-announce it now. I'll be kind of overseeing our overactive immune disorder department in our company. So for you guys who don't know, I work for Vital Coaching, who's owned by Vince Pitstick, who is a pioneer in the functional space, along with Jason Theobald and some of those other people. I would say David DiMasquetta is also kind of one of those people as well that I always looked up to and have a good relationship with. But I started working with Vince about 2 years ago after going through my own struggles with functional stuff. And like Rachel knows, like I worked with the best of the best coaches that I look up to in the industry. And we couldn't figure it out, and we really had a piece missing. And we've nailed down that piece with a lot of the work of Walter Longo and fasting modalities. And I love to see that. I'm starting to see more people talk about this. I don't know. Have you started to see this yet? Like I'm seeing this on like some big names that were pretty against it are coming out and they're talking about this now.
Yeah, I definitely see it talked about a little bit more, and like it's always cool when I hear about how things are going in your world and like with Vital, because like it's connected to bodybuilding and that world and the coaching world of bodybuilding, but it's still pretty separate, you know.
Yes.
Especially for just like so many people in the sport. Like when people are new to bodybuilding, they don't always generally know about how much like functional health plays a role in your success as a bodybuilder, but also like just your health in general.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I know about a lot of how these things are connected, and that's a big part of what we're talking about today. But um, yeah, so like my content, obviously, that I see on Instagram and just like out in the world is a lot different from what you probably see. There's
Oh.
some crossovers for sure. But yeah, I definitely have seen a lot of crossover or carryover with people just talking more about autoimmune and
Mhm.
just how that impacts us and how
Yeah.
it's affected by things like bodybuilding or dieting in general or
The
weight loss,
combination of,
whatever.
yeah, of the two together, functional and bodybuilding. And I really try to bring in a bodybuilding aspect to my clients because I'm a bodybuilder at heart.
Hmm.
And it is still a passion of mine. And I really try to focus on training intensity, programming, things like that with my clients. Not everyone is actually well enough to train, which was new for me going into that space because I had come from bodybuilding clients
Yeah.
and people who were clients of mine at F45 and Orange Theory. So they moved a lot. It was a really interesting experience to work with. I had even worked with a pro bodybuilder, an IFBB pro bodybuilder female who, when she came to me, was using a walker and a wheelchair and just out of being hospitalized, and to go through the process of really working immune system and gut and all of these issues into fertility. And she just gave birth a couple weeks ago to her baby, which was incredible. These things are life changing for people. So I love the combination of the two because something so little as cortisol can affect the way that glucose metabolism happens in the body and can affect the way you build. If stress is high and you're not aware of stress perception, which I really appreciate as a coach, you really hone down on is not just stress, but stress perception and how we can mitigate the side effects of that. We can build better. That's a one for one
A
fact.
healthy body is a responsive body, and that's not just like, oh, do I feel like I'm healthy, or
Yeah.
like, oh, well, I feel fine. But everyone's definition of fine and
Yeah.
healthy is different.
Yeah.
And
Listen, you can be optimistic and you can be like, oh, I'm okay. And shit can still be going awry in your life.
yeah, or you can be okay with what's actually not okay. Like so many people just like live in this state of just mediocrity or feeling kind of like shit. Like, you know, I've had clients where, you know, oh yeah, it's totally normal for me to like only have a bowel movement every 3 days. That's just how I've been for my whole life. And
Yeah.
it's like a lot of coaches too and competitors just think that that's okay. And they
Yeah.
think that like, oh, well, it's fine because it's always been like that. Or it's like, it's not really affecting things that much. So like, we don't need to think about it or we don't need to address
Yeah.
it. But
It's
when
mind
you
blowing.
do start addressing it, it's mind blowing how much progress that we can actually make.
Yeah. I have seen that to be true. I just onboarded a really well known actress, and she we were walking through her history, and she had done a lot of work as a child star as well. And it was really interesting. I had said, like, the digestion wasn't marked, it wasn't an issue. It was just I want to like look my best and feel my best for the age range she's going into. And I said, okay, well, tell me about digestion. She's like, it's fine. Great. How often do you poop? And she's like, once, twice a week. And I'm like, whoa, 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 like, excuse me. And but she's been doing it since she's been 12, 13, 14. So for her, this is very normal. And when I was talking about this, she was like, she didn't quite get like how much that is not right. You know, she was like, well, it's just the way things have been. And it's like, well, that's a great example that things have been awry for a very long time.
Yeah.
That ain't how it is. Which actually leads us to the topic I know you wanted to talk about, is kind of like going back to mood and how you feel, is the topic around antidepressants. And I always want to preface these conversations with saying I'm not a medical doctor. You need to talk to your doctor before you make any changes. But I also think you need to research before you make any changes as far as getting on anything as well. I think it's important to know your options and
Be your own advocate
yeah,
and ask more questions of your doctors as well, or anyone who's providing care to you.
I mean, it's so funny how many people will tell me, "Oh, did you know that HRT, like estrogen replacement therapy, causes blood clotting?" And I'm like, "Did you know that it's 5 times higher in birth control?" No, oh, your doctor didn't tell you that. Oh, okay, sounds good. Oh, you didn't know that
Yeah.
nicotine actually exacerbated that? They never asked you if you vaped. Oh, okay, that's fine. Little things that we don't know, like you're 60% more likely to have anxiety and depression on birth control. Did you know that? No, we don't talk about that. Like we don't. But if you were to ask, this is what I always tell people before you. I love Western medicine. It saves lives. It makes a difference in people's lives, and I think antidepressants can really be beneficial, especially when people are transitioning through a hard time, a divorce, a job loss, the loss of a parent, something traumatic like that. They can be an amazing tool. You just have to ask the question, like, how does this affect me long term? How does this
Yeah.
affect me short term? What are the side effects? Why? The most important thing that you can look up, it's free, it's on Google. I sound like Trump. It's a beautiful thing. Things are beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. Chat GPT or Google or whatever you do, like, what nutritional deficiencies come from a PPI? Boom. Now you know what to do to supplement. Like, you don't have to hire a coach. I mean, I love being a coach, like, hey, follow me out stuff. But at the end of the day, like, you can Google like what deficiencies come from these things as well. And you can look at your own research. So I always say, like, always look into this stuff for yourself before you take anything, because you really want to know what the commitment level is for something like this. We're very easy to walk into a relationship with a substance that we're putting in our body for 3 or 4 years because it's so hard to come off these things without understanding how they are going to affect us short and long term. So, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that? I know we're just kind of segueing into this.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think like the reason I wanted to talk about this was because like obviously you're a great person to talk to it about, and I know that you've had clients where you've had great success stories with like people coming off of antidepressants, and also just I wanted to talk a lot about the connection between medications like that and other problems in the body that might arise from using it. So like the nutrient deficiencies
Yeah.
or, gut, the gut brain connection and the connection from medications of some kind to how your gut functions. Because if you're depressed, anxious, sad, mad, whatever, and you decide to go on an antidepressant and you're not aware of some of the deficiencies that can come from that or the side effects that can come from that, and you just are only focused on this one thing that this medication will allow you to do, hopefully, and you're not thinking about like the whole picture and how it affects the entire body, then you're possibly potentially setting yourself up for future problems that may not be worth it.
Yeah.
Right? And so how do you decide what is worth it and what's not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So this is so good. So I think the thing to kind of understand, first of all, is there's two types, normally two classes of antidepressants that are the most common. That's going to be an SSRI, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And then there's also going to be an MAOI, which is going to be monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So they're both types of antidepressants, but they work very differently. SSRIs, I would say, are going to be the most common that you'll typically see. They're more step one. If you had to say like a phase 1, phase 2, typically, and not in all cases, MAOs will come from a person who's still not seeing improvements in an SSRI. However, it's doctor dependent, like everything, right? So it's important to kind of understand how they work. And if you do have a predisposition to manic depressive, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, I think genes are also important to look at. And we'll talk a little bit about what to look for if you do have that. diagnosis as well. But um, SSRIs work by basically increasing the amount of serotonin in your brain. So it helps regulate mood, it helps calm us down, it helps kind of make us feel good. But it also prevents the brain from reabsorbing it too quickly. So if you think of the game Hungry Hungry Hippo, right? We've all played it. And you think of all the marbles on the Hungry Hippo thing. The brain wants to go and just grab all those uh, marbles as fast as they can. But the faster they're grabbed and gone, the less good you feel, right? Like we would like to keep them there for as long as possible because we get to feel those feelings for as long as possible. So let's just say a person reaches peak orgasm. Neurotransmitters are released, dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin are released. You feel like your mood is good. There are people that might feel good for, and then it goes away within 30, 45 seconds. And there are people that might feel good for an hour. This is also the same people who don't necessarily feel all the effects from other things as well, too. They're typically low responders in some ways. From an outside perspective, might be more Eeyore-ish. I don't know if anyone's seen Winnie the Pooh. I mean, I'm sure, but more like, and it's not their fault. They're not negative or bad people. They
Low
just,
and duller. Yeah.
it's a chemical imbalance is really what it is. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We'll get to it, but SSRIs will help that from staying more abundant in the brain for longer. So this is more like depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, things like that. More like Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro is a really common one. Prozac, I think, is the most common of those that I typically see. And then you have MAOIs, which are going to be a little bit different because they increase all. So they break down serotonin, dopamine, and like norepinephrine, and they keep them from being broken down. They help the body create them and keep them from being broken down so quickly. So if you've ever done a dopamine drug, so like MDMA, like more ecstasy, things like that, they're more, you're even cocaine, it's more like wee, and then you do something like mushrooms, which increase more serotonin than dopamine. It's more like, whoa. It's more like chill, calm. Dopamine's more like up, go. Norepinephrine's more up, go. That's what MAOIs do. They're working on those other neurotransmitters. So SSRIs are solely for serotonin, which is why they use a lot of medicinal psilocybin in place of SSRIs now. Whereas MAOIs increase all of those neurotransmitters, those excitatory hormones as well. So they're more for chronic depression and manic depressive situations. This is why you'll also see MDMA in chronic and depressive cycles for treatment. And that's kind of the difference of what you'll see. Typically people who need a little bit more, like, so I'm talking about all modalities here, and I'm in no way certified or licensed to talk about outside modalities, but just in the way that they interact in the brain, that would give an example. And I just feel like people understand that. I don't have to make it too sciencey. Like, you get what I'm saying. I know you do. Like, you understand. So they both affect the gut too. So we'll talk kind of gut hormones and those other cycles. They affect them a little bit differently. I would say that SSRIs wreak more havoc on the gut. About 90% of their serotonin is created inside the gut. And so they increase serotonin levels. They definitely increase and change the microbiome. They impact them very differently, which is kind of interesting. When you're taking an SSRI, you'll typically see a decrease in stomach acid, whereas an MAOI, you'll see an increase in stomach acid. And let me tell you why both can be pretty bad and wreak havoc on the gut. So we work in this perfect world inside of our gut, and our gut is so fucking resilient. Like, it really is. Your gut and your liver, like, they can take a beating and they can come back. But it's that kind of like acute versus chronic. Like, you can get E. coli and not even know you have it, and your body will just wage a war. Maybe you'll have the runs for a couple of days. You won't, like, this is if you have a resilient gut, you should be able to fight that off. If you don't, you're going to end up sick in the hospital. Now, when you have low stomach acid, your gut is this beautiful place, and it's got a perfect pH, and it's got this slippery mucosa lining, just like filling it. It's got these little fingers that stick up. They're like little, can they watch? I think
Yeah, they can watch.
Okay. Are they watching?
What's happening in your gut.
You guys
Yeah.
see me? They have these fingers that kind of, they go up and they move around, and these fingers absorb nutrients, they absorb proteins, they absorb vitamins, they absorb minerals from the foods that you're eating. Which is why when a person has low stomach acid, you'll see low protein total. You and I have talked about this. She goes, you were like, I just didn't eat that much protein that day. I was like, no, girl, that's not what this is from. You'll see low protein on labs. You can normally say, oh, this person might have a little bit of low stomach acid. Common signs of this can be heartburn, burping, belching, a little bit of bloating after foods. You might not even know that you have low stomach acid. And we can talk later about how you can test for that and kind of address either way. But it's really important that when you are taking an SSRI, you are really nurturing the gut lining as well, because low stomach acid means degradation in the mucosa lining. If you think about this lining as a protective barrier, this mucus is a protective barrier, and underneath, it's kind of like if you had a beautiful like land with flowers and grass, and then it dried out, and then you picture like a desert with the cracked like lands, like we all see, like I've never seen that in real life, and I've been to a lot of deserts, but like how you kind of see in movies where the land's all cracked. Same thing, you have those perforations where you can have bacteria and other viruses and undigested food go through those linings. So those tight junctions open. And when those tight junctions open, you're at a higher risk for Hashimoto's, inflammation, thyroid hypofunction, brain dysfunction. So many different things can go wrong from that. And
just from the low stomach acid.
Just in low stomach acid. I mean, leaky gut. So this is leaky gut, what I'm talking about. Like leaky gut's a thing. Like, it's like a sexy term, right? Oh, leaky gut, leaky gut, leaky gut. Most people don't really understand, like, how does your gut even begin to leak? And it starts at the top of the chain with low stomach acid, which is why you'll typically see people on SSRIs with more stomach dysfunction, because when we have low variety, so let's just say flowers and grass and dirt, they're all gone. It's just a desert. Who survives? The scorpions and spiders and weird shit out there like rattlesnakes. And that's the same way beneficial and opportunistic bacteria survive. The ones who survive are not the ones you want an abundance of. The ones who are the most nourishing, beneficial, they help with motility, regularity, they get killed off. And there's an abundance of these bad guys. And so you have this dysfunction going on there. So that's why you have a little bit more high risk dysfunction when a person's on an SSRI, and it's kind of hard to break that cycle. Some things that you can do are very low grade. So apple cider vinegar, betaine HCl, these are things you can add in digestive enzymes that can help. Things like aloe vera juice, marshmallow tea, bone broth, really good for the mucosa lining that you can add into any plan. I don't care how low your macros are, that can be really beneficial. If you are someone going into a prep, it's more important for you than anyone else to make sure that your body is absorbing the nutrients, because you're not only eating less, you're absorbing less than Sally down the street with those flourishing little villi. So it's really important in building, and it's really important in a deficit to make sure that you have optimal stomach acid and digestive capacity, because if you're not absorbing what you eat, you're at a higher risk for muscle loss, fatigue, vitamin deficiencies, that which will affect more mood, which can affect energy. And we talked about the thyroid function. So when you are in prep and you are on an SSRI, stomach acid support, like I said, betaine HCl. If you don't like the taste of apple cider, you can do chewables, you can do other things. Digestive enzymes, which work differently. So people will say, oh, I take a digestive enzyme.
There's lots of different enzymes out there.
There's a lot of different enzymes. And an enzyme is simply a compound that breaks down a fruit, a fiber, a fat, a protein. They work a little bit differently, and they work conjunctively together, right? However, an acid is different. That's changing the pH of the gut. That works differently. Okay, so you want to take a stomach acid support with a digestive enzyme. Those are important. And then you also really want to watch the mucosa lining. So like the things I said before, in addition to that, an easy supplement, really inexpensive, zinc carnosine. Zinc carnosine and aloe juice in the morning, I love. I used to preach off the top of the mountains about L-glutamine. L-glutamine is great for gut. The thing about L-glutamine and people with anxiety is if you have a dysfunction in your glutamate pathways, which if you have anxiety and depression, you might. And if you haven't done a gene test, you don't know. It's a little risky to add glutamine every day at something like 15 grams, which is where we prescribe it for a gut issue. So this is where it's a caveat. So oh, well, I heard, like Jason talks about this all the time. Jason Diable. I love Jason. Like, he's so good. I've learned so much from him over the years. He talks about L-glutamine for gut, and he's absolutely right. And we do it 90% of the time in gut cases. However, if they have anxiety or they're on an SSRI, I don't
Might
do
not
it.
be the best thing for them.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's going to be a contradiction. But those other things I said, like bone broth, marshmallow, all those things, you can literally Google leaky gut support, and there's hundreds of companies that make leaky gut cocktails that have like DGL, which is a type of licorice that's soothing. All of these are great. So now let's move down a little bit to what MAOIs do. Now, they're very different, right? Because they affect different chemicals inside of the brain. So with MAOIs, you tend to have higher stomach acid. So this is why it's important to talk about both these, because it will affect the body very differently. And I want to just reiterate, low stomach acid will cause heartburn. Now, does high stomach acid cause heartburn? Yes. So if you have heartburn before you take a PPI, it's best to do, you can literally Google it, the baking soda test. They have 1,000 blogs about it. It's the same thing pretty much in every different version. And you take baking soda with water, and depending on how long it takes for you to burp, you either have high or low stomach acid. That's a great way to diagnose without just starting on something to lower stomach acid. Or if you're unsure if you are on an MAOI, but you have heartburn, I always say it's best to test stomach acid before trying to suppress it. Too much is a lot better than too little.
Yeah.
However, too much can also put you at a higher risk for ulcers. And if you're adding things like apple cider vinegar in, because people will take apple cider vinegar for all different reasons.
Yeah, they just take it for fun or for fat loss, or, if someone else is taking it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of benefits for apple cider vinegar. Don't get me wrong. But if you are on an MAOI, or if you have high stomach acid and you're now inducing a higher risk of an ulcer or stomach acid burning or some of these other things that can also cause just as much dysfunction inside of the gut. The thing with MAOIs too is you really have to be, because they are amine based. So again, tyramine rich foods, every food, like nightshades is a perfect example. Every food has a chemical that's released when you eat it. Amines, they have nightshade chemicals. I can't remember all of them right now, and you wouldn't be surprised if I did or didn't, so it's all good. But tyramine specifically, when you are on MAOIs, should be avoided. So these are more like wines, cured meats, typically like aged cheeses. And you can honestly just Google tyramine rich foods as well, and you can look these up. It'll give you a list, and those should be avoided. Same thing when you have like the glutamate dysfunction in your genetics, you should avoid glutamate rich foods as well, which is like cashews, some leafy greens, things like that. It's just important. This is why I love gene testing. It can be really beneficial, but it's not going to be for everybody, right? But if you are on an antidepressant like an MAOI, it's important to understand that you want to avoid those. Your doctor will not normally tell you that. It's important to test your stomach acid. And it's important, if you have high stomach acid, to soothe the lining of your gut. So those same things, when we talked about rebuilding the mucosa lining, soothe the lining of the gut. So like DGL, zinc carnosine, marshmallow tea, bone broth, all of these are soothing for the gut. This is where like a ginger balm or ginger chews can be a little bit helpful sometimes too. Sometimes people with higher stomach acid will have a higher risk of sometimes nausea after they're eating too, and I'm kind of talking like black and white. I hate talking like that, but typically you'll see higher stomach acid, more nausea, lower stomach acid, more bloating after a person eats. So as a coach too, if you're listening and you have a client who is on a MAOI, it's important to understand that might be another symptom as well. Sex. I mean, we're on a podcast together, so
Yeah.
but this is not new. People know that sexual dysfunction comes with the use of antidepressants. There's a caveat, like all things. An SSRI will typically lower sexual desire, will lower your ability to orgasm, because too much serotonin can actually dampen that sexual desire. Because it's not necessarily raising, specifically chemically manufactured to raise dopamine in these other levels, SSRIs can actually lower dopamine, which lowers libido. So that's difficulty getting aroused. That's difficulty orgasming. That's difficulty just in general wanting it. And you'll see this. You and I have talked about this as a very low desire. And clients are like, well, I don't understand why I don't have a high sex drive, or like why I just never think about sex or want it. And you feel bad because you obviously love your partner. These play a big part into it. MAOIs don't. So if you were like, I have all these side effects with an SSRI, could be more beneficial to go to an MAOI. However, it's a bigger commitment level because now you're really becoming dependent on all of your neurotransmitters with this medication.
Mhm.
An MAOI, again, we talked about it being more like Molly, is typically higher sex drive, maybe more kind of like addict behavior, more desire, more easier time reaching orgasm, more interested as a whole in having sex, because dopamine will make all things feel better, right? And they,
Yeah.
MAOIs are used in other cases too, like with Parkinson's and some other dopamine kind of related diseases as well. But as a whole, kind of in short, SSRIs will lower sex drive by increasing serotonin, and it lowers dopamine. So that's why that happens. And MAOIs affect libido in a positive way because it increases dopamine, but it still can cause long-term issues of dependence on there, which over time can cause more libido issues. But as a whole, MAOIs, you won't see that quite as much. Any questions so far? I know I'm just kind of
No, this is
plowing
great.
through this. Okay.
So, we're talking about some of the things that can come from being on these two different types of medication. What
Yeah.
would you say, like, say a listener is listening to this and they're using one of these things, but they are feeling some of these side effects, or they're worried about these side effects and how they might affect them long term, or how dependency might affect them long term. In my mind, like, we shouldn't want, our goal should be to be medication free. That would be like my ultimate goal for myself and for clients. Obviously the expense is one part of it, but also just like the side effects you have to deal with, or that you might develop at some point, or if you have other goals outside of just whatever your goal is with taking the medication, like bodybuilding, for example. So if someone listening to this is considering, well, what is the alternative to these things?
Yeah.
Like, do I have hope, or is there hope for not just coming off of this, but like managing my anxiety or my stress
Yeah.
without these things, or possibly with an alternative?
So if I have a client coming to me and I find out they are on some sort of SSRI or even a Wellbutrin or something for ADHD or an MAOI, they're on something for a mood disorder. My first thing is, what's your diagnosis? And then based on their diagnosis, because sometimes it's just, I got this from my general practitioner, and sometimes I got this from my psychiatrist. Those are very different.
Yeah.
I can't stress enough how very different those are. A general practitioner in a time where you are not feeling good, their job is to keep you alive and safe. So if you have any sort of like thoughts about life ending or things like that, that's their first go-to, is going to be a prescription for an SSRI. But if you have something like manic depressive or bipolar disorder, that's typically coming from a diagnosis from a psychiatrist. And these are, again, just very different. The biggest thing I can tell people is your genes. I mean, there's so many things that play a role into the way that you feel. My first question is, are you on a birth control? Because if you are, again, and I think birth controls are extremely beneficial, and I understand that not everyone lives in a pro-choice state, and I completely understand that it feels probably a lot different for me to say that in a pro-choice state than maybe a pro-life state. And I'm not going to obviously speak on stances on that, but at the end of the day, it's like there's other methods that go to prevent pregnancy that don't affect your hormones. When you take a birth control, it is typically an estradiol and a progestin. So a progestin is very different than progesterone. This is commonly mistaken or talked about from practitioners, which is weird, because they're doctors, that it's your body makes progestin. And so basically it's like being on hormone replacement therapy. Progestin is synthetic, and it tells the body basically not to ovulate or conceive. Depending on there's a lot of different birth controls. I'm just kind of talking about more of the pill here and kind of how those things work. And when you are on that, it suppresses your progesterone. Now, progesterone creates a neurotransmitter called GABA. And GABA is our calming hormone. That is our, like, I feel good. You know what? Like, you're on your phone in the middle of me talking to you, and it doesn't really bother me because I feel fine. Versus, like, can you chew with your mouth closed? You know? And that's like the difference where I tell people, I'm like,
Yeah.
how's your relationship? And they're like, it's just, like, it's hard. We have to go through our times. Like, well, imagine, like, I'm not saying it's anyone's fault, but at the same time, you're a lot less patient when you're empty on hormones. And this is where a lot of anxiety and unease comes because you don't have your calming hormone to settle you down.
Yeah.
So is it the fact that you're low in hormones and that's causing this sort of chain reaction to anxiety and to depression, again, to low desire as a whole, because those will go hand in hand. And again, most practitioners won't, but it's alarming rates at which people are prescribed both birth control and an SSRI.
Without the education that
The
should
education of
be
why.
backing that up, because
Yeah.
like you said, like the goal of a primary care provider is to keep someone safe and keep someone, get someone out of the office, right? Like that, unfortunately, that's just kind of how it works for a lot of times. It's like, oh, you have this problem, here's this thing to fix it.
Yeah.
And what they're not actually doing is fixing the cause of the problem. They're
Yeah.
fixing the symptom of the problem.
Yeah.
Which for some people, that's like, all I want is to get rid of the symptom. All I want is to feel better. All I want is to.
That's okay too. Like if you're like, all I
Right.
want to do is just feel better, I don't really care. That's okay too. I've actually had 2 clients on my roster where I'm like, I'm a little concerned. Like I think that you should look at introducing an SSRI because they might share that they are thinking about ending their life or they're feeling very. I've gotten emails like that certainly before. And I'm not a doctor, but just as a regular everyday human being, that's the best.
Yeah, you want to help them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Me talking
And
it through. I'm not a therapist. I can't. I'm obviously. I always recommend the suicide hotline and calling and stuff. But my first is let's get you in with a doctor and let's see what they recommend as far as a prescription method because that will buffer that time while we work through other things. And you can do SSRIs for 2 months and have great outcomes. So hear my heart on that. They can be beneficial. The issue is when we're dealing with these longer term effects, or when your doctor doesn't say, "Hey, boo." That birth control actually might be causing that. Let's move you to a non-hormonal. Let's move you to a different version. Let's talk about the fertility awareness method. Never have I had an OBGYN talk to me about the fertility awareness method. It's either do you use a birth control or are you unprotected? And I'm like, well, can't we like not use a birth control and be protected? Like, oh, that's a thing. Yes, I'm so sorry, but you can only get pregnant one day. You can live for 4 to 5 days. Yes, that's true, but it's a very small window here. And this is, I mean, we can talk about birth control. I can come back. This is that rabbit hole we get into about different conversations, but birth control is the one thing. The second thing is your genetics. I cannot drive this home enough. When I first started learning about genetics, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense. Like my whole life, the way that I think, my history with addiction, all of it. I was like, okay, because you always wonder why me and not them. Like in different situations, like why does that bother them and not
especially
me?
when you're going through it, or when you feel stuck, like you're just knocking at the door of something and you can't get through something, like with OID, with your autoimmune.
All of it. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. All of it. And the 2 biggest ones I'd say with anxiety and depression are COMT and MAO. So something is so easy as like a genetic 3x4 can be really beneficial. I like the Pro 7. However, you'll need to get a review with those. You can get them both on our website, the Vital Coaching website. You can order a review if you're like, I really want to dive into my genetics.
Things, right?
I think it's like $50 extra to get a review with recommendations on that. It's not much more. When you order the testing, and the testing is less than a Dutch test. I want to say it's around just $200. Don't quote, it could be $220, so it's around there. But COMT and MAO are going to be the 2 biggest players. And when you have what we would call, well, let's just say when you're looking at it and you have a full block or 2 minuses, however you want it, there's hetero homozygous, but we'll just make it simple because genes is complex. When you see it and you're like, okay, it's green, it's yellow, it's red. Red is like, oh, we've got 2 blocks on there. That's typically more ADHD, dopamine seekers, addicts as a whole. And they can also have a higher risk for like anxiety and things like that as well. MAOA and MAOB will also look at neurotransmitters. And when people have blocks in those, you can be more like thrill seekers, more prone to Parkinson's, because that MAO means you're clearing it out. Like anytime you have two minuses together, it means it's fast. That pathway is open. So someone like me needs more all the time. If you are a competitor, guess what? This might be you too. This also might be you. There's a lot of addicts in bodybuilding. And I know you see it, I see it. It's why I loved it. It's just like something to be hyper focused on. You'll see people do this with shopping, with Amazon, with like all things, right? Because they're looking for that next fix because dopamine's gone in and left so quickly.
Yeah.
Same thing with MAOA and MAOB. They have a hard time keeping these neurotransmitters around and producing as much as they need because it's just running through so fast. There's very easy solutions for this too. A deficiency in B12 and in folate are massive players into seizures, bipolar disorder. You'll typically see this, like a person with seizures also have some bipolar disorder. You'll see this in mood disorders as a whole. You'll see this in depression and anxiety. They will typically have some sort of dysfunction. If you think about it as like a cycle of like anything, like a wheel, right? If there's dysfunctions in the wheel can't be completed, and that affects neurotransmitters and mood on a massive level. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who have dysfunctions in this, either too quick or too slow, and they need support. And they're going on medications without looking at the root cause. And that can cause more deficiencies in those other things, which make them in a year or two have to change medicines or go up higher. Or guess what? They were anxious and now they're bipolar.
Yeah. That's what I see a lot of is people having to like, okay, yeah, you feel better for a period of time. And then, you're having to deal with this kind of vicious circle, this hamster wheel of other side effects that then make you more anxious because like, well, now I'm dealing with all of this. And then I'm depressed because of like, I don't have control over my own body and I don't know what's going on. So, okay, the only answer I have is like, I'll go back to my doctor and tell them that this is where it's at. And so they get a new medication and they just kind of go back and forth to popping to different medications without really understanding like, well, how do I focus on the root cause? Like, what is there hope for me to like fix or at least treat or manage the root cause in some way that's not with this thing that I just have to keep depending on and changing and things like that.
Yeah, 100%. This is where like really understanding that like niacin, folate, B vitamins as a whole, B6, B5, B3, CoQ enzymes, calcium, vitamin D, all get very depleted when you're taking antidepressants. And folate is a big player in that. And so if you have a dysfunction in folate and then your body's depleted of it and you're not able to absorb it from nutrients that you're eating, which is a genetic issue as well, that 60% of people have, if not more, it can cause a bigger issue down the line. And so that can affect metabolism, weight loss, thyroid, but mood is typically the first thing we'll see it. And then pregnancy is another thing where you'll really see folate affect things. And like I said, this can even lead to things like seizures down the line. I mean, there's a genetic component to even PTSD type seizures. Like, yes, it's triggered by PTSD. However, there's a genetic component to people who get those PTSD seizures. So it is very interesting when you start learning about the world of genetics, just how beneficial, like I just wish more people knew, like everyone's like BRCA gene. I'm like, MTHFR, but everyone talks about MTHFR, but there's like so many different snippets and it's only folate, CompT, MAO. These are bigger. Like, I don't think they're bigger, but they're definitely things where I see those on a person's genetics and like, because the folate cycle is actually really resilient. So you can have one block and still make it work. You know what I mean? Yeah, it can affect a person for sure. Don't get me wrong, but it's not quite like there's a lot when it comes to methylation. You've got methionine, you got SAMe, you got a lot of creatine, you got a lot of players that play a part in the methylation cycle. Folate is also important. B12 is also important, but they're not just those things alone can make a difference. So don't think I'm not saying that, but they're not normally the only reason. It's not like a person will come to me and they'll go, and I have MTHFR. What are we going to do about the MTHFR? I have MTHFR. I'm like, that's a label someone gave you. Like they forgot the 400 other gene snippets that are probably causing more dysfunction. Like genetically, you don't get into autophagy, your cells don't clean.
Mm-hmm.
Like genetically, you can't process dopamine. You're born to be a warrior, like you worry about things more than born to be like a warrior, like a fighter, you know? Like these
Yeah.
are genetic dispositions. So that's another thing that I think is really important. I think with anyone, if they're trying to transition, I think this is where working with a practitioner that can work alongside your psychiatrist or general practitioner is really important. I do believe in the conversation between both practitioners, because you really want to make sure one, as a client, they're not being pulled in multiple directions.
Mm-hmm.
That's so important. You've seen
Yeah.
it, I've seen it, where you're like,
There's too many cooks in the
too
kitchen,
many
or
cooks,
there's
and the
like,
client feels like they have to choose a parent.
yeah.
It's more stress than it's worth. And at that point, if I have a practitioner I'm working with that's so adamant, I'll hear, can you just explain why? And then let's give it a try. And then if it doesn't work, can we try this? And normally they'll go for it. And every once in a while I learn something new or something works. But sometimes it's because they're not doing as many repetitions on the same exact situation. I work a lot of the same situation over and over and over and over and over again. But now if I tried to like move somebody through a plateau in a bodybuilding situation, I'd be like, you know, like
Yeah.
it's about where you're
You have
putting
the
it.
experience of what you're doing a lot more. For
Exactly.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that makes a huge difference. There are some really great products that are designed to support. I think that lithium orotate is awesome in these cases where you're seeing a lot of depression, 5-HTP, the use of psilocybin. I do really want to say that the use of psilocybin should also, and LSD, which is more of a dopamine pathway, all of these should be used alongside a practitioner if you're trying to get the mental health benefits. Because if you are dealing with some of these things and you're putting, like, for example, you do struggle with depression and you're doing Molly every few days, your dopamine levels are going to be so hard low on those come downs. So wrecked on those come downs. You're really playing with kind of fire in that sense. So this is where I think that with a kind of like plant medicine, if you will, or chemical medicine, whatever you want to call it, can be done really well. I think there's some really good, I can't think right now, but I can give it to you and you can put it in the show notes, of a company that does like at home stuff with ketamine, LSD,
Yeah.
MDMA, mushrooms, and you can kind of follow along with that. That's another modality. I really think talk therapy is beneficial, addressing your hormones. So working with someone who can identify like, hey, is this hormonal? Is this genetic? What can we do? Because these things can be worked on while you're on an antidepressant.
Yeah.
And then once you start to feel a little bit better, you come down a little bit more, come down a little bit more. Okay, let's make another change. Let's make another change. Normally when and I want to be tread lightly here because I give you like protocols online, but normally if I'm transitioning somebody off, I'm pulsing something like HTP or something like 5-HTP or something like that, or an L-DOPA or something to kind of support those transitions down. But I can't stress enough how much like lifestyle also makes a difference. Okay, like you have
Yeah.
prescribed fun on Friday, so like plan bowling or paint and sip, or like you're planning intentional fun, because you talk about this a lot too. It's like what we do with our body influences our minds. The words we speak influences our mood. So
Mm-hmm.
making sure that
The
you're
work is
practicing.
right. Like, a client check-in. I'm really big on client check-ins. It's not that I want everyone to be like, oh, positive, everything is great all the time, but what someone's words are that they feel like are important for me to know is like tells me a big story about where that person is at and how they're going to progress through whatever phase or whatever goal we're working towards. And if every single check-in has some negative comment about your body, even though you are technically in exactly the phase you are meant to be in for your goal that you told me you wanted to do, which is, I want to grow, I want to look like that. But every single week while you're doing everything right, you're still hating on your body, then that is only going to make you worse. Or it's at the very least, it's going to keep you in the same place.
Yeah.
Because you are rooting everything, you're living in the past. You're living in this like version of yourself that you wish you weren't. And so there's this sense of lack and this sense of like disappointment and shame of where you're at, instead of just what if you focused on what you're good at right now and what you're doing well at and
Yes.
what is fun about building, like getting strong, like, you know, having lots of food and having a better libido, like things like that that are undervalued and underlooked when we're talking about like a bodybuilder in a building phase, or even just like a maintenance phase, right? But like if you're only focused and fixated on what's negative, then and you keep repeating that, then you're not going to like, just repeating that isn't doing anything for you. Like think critically about like, what does saying this really do for me?
Yeah.
It doesn't solve a problem. So same thing with stress and stress perception. Like I said this to a client today, like laying in bed thinking about all of the problems that are going on, everything you're stressed about, does that make you money? Does that help your business, laying in bed and thinking about it? No. So you have the option of getting out of bed and fucking figuring it out and solving the problem and going into the office, or getting out your laptop and fixing it,
Mhm.
or you just focus on letting that shit go and like allowing it to be something you worry about tomorrow when you actually are at work, or when you actually are with the person you're having a stressful situation with, or whatever it is you're
Yeah.
stressed about.
Yeah. 100%. I think you nailed it. In a nutshell, that's it right there. Mic drop. Antidepressants, this is how they work, all the stuff you do. But at the end of the day, like what you do with your mouth makes such a big influence. And I don't want to like, there's people that are listening that's like, fuck you. I've tried gratitude and yoga and mindfulness and I still didn't feel good. That's okay. You probably were born this way. And that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah,
a
you can give yourself grace and not be ashamed of what your gene testing says. You can figure out what it says, talk to someone who can help you
yeah.
understand it, and take action steps towards it.
There's
But
so much that can come out of genes. Like even for me, like realizing that like after like a hard conversation or a stressful situation, I stay a little bit more heightened than maybe like another person. Like I have the tendency to stay more heightened. And so for me, when something occurs, I need to take space before discussing it.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
That changed my whole everything because I'm
yeah,
not showing up explosive. I can just ask for first asking for space. That's people pleasing. That's a whole nother issue. But like just being able to identify like this is what I need. I actually need 5 minutes. 90% of the time when I take 5 minutes, I'm the first one to come back and say sorry.
yeah.
Because I can take a minute and I can see on my side of the street versus
You
like if
take a
I'm in the
different
moment,
perspective.
I'm so here, I'm combative. I'm my neurotransmitters are ready to fight. I'm just like even if it's not something, you know. And I notice that even if I get honked at, I'm like, and I'm like, okay, you're okay. That was humiliating, but you're okay, you know. Whereas like a normal person might get honked at and it's fine. It doesn't wreck my day because I go, okay, in 5 minutes I'll be okay. This is not even a big
Yeah.
deal. Yeah. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it comes down to just like the more you can learn about yourself by asking yourself questions after something happens, after you get anxious, after when you notice your stress, when you notice tension, just like noticing more about yourself and like really being aware of like what your body is doing. Like, okay, I'm bloated. Don't just think like automatically like, oh, I need to do something about this, or like, oh, it's because of this, it's because of that. It's like think really about like, well, what have you done to that has possibly caused this? Don't think about it as this like big bad thing that's now this mystery that you need to go and fix and go to the doctor and go get a medication for. It's like it could very well be something so much simpler, like let learning to manage your stress better, or you know, looking at your, you know, are you snacking all day, or are you having meals? Are you eating fruits and veggies, or are you eating convenience food because you're stressed and you don't have anything prepared?
Mhm.
There's so many like little simple like lifestyle and mindset and thought pattern behaviors that can really change how you function.
Yeah.
And even if it's not going to like solve the problem, like no, gratitude by itself doesn't solve any problems. But if it allows you to feel a little bit more at peace,
Yes.
and that peace, seeing what that peace can give you in terms of like, oh, I feel a little bit more equipped to handle what I'm going through right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel equipped to have a
More
more mature
resiliency.
adult conversation, or it's write this email with a little less heated, right?
Yeah.
Then you find that control for yourself, and if you can control yourself, you can control so much in your life.
Yeah, so good. It's so true. Like I second all of that. It really does make a huge difference. And I think at the end of the day, and I'd love to come back and do a podcast. I know we've talked about it before about emotional addiction and like the stress response, because there is an addiction piece to stress.
Yeah, there
And
absolutely is.
and it feels good because it raises our neurotransmitters and
And
it
it's like an entitlement thing. Like, oh, people are addicted to that like hustle culture a lot of the time, especially like I see that in like coaching and like entrepreneurship is like, how much more can I show that I work harder than anybody
who
else?
doesn't appreciate that? Clients.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they
I have a
see
lot more
it.
clients that go, how many clients do you have? Because I want a coach that's going to be present with me. More
Exactly.
than
I
anything
get
else,
that
especially when they're coming from another coach, they say,
for
how
like
many
200
clients do you
clients.
have? Because I don't want a coach that's burning the candle at both ends because it shows up in work. I've had that. It's
It
miserable. You're
does.
saying a lot for somebody who you're like, this person don't got me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
all that. So, yeah, awesome. I love it.
Well, I know we're reaching our end, but thank you so much
Yes,
for
thank you
talking
for having me on.
all the things here. I hope this was helpful and not too like all over the place for people. But if you guys have any questions or if you resonated with anything we talked about, especially when it comes to some of the genetic testing stuff and how you might support yourself with supplementation if you're on any kind of SSRIs, MOAIs. Sonia is a amazing resource, and she does this for a living, as you can probably tell from how confidently she speaks on everything. So you can reach out to her. Her information is going to be in the show notes, and you can find her on Instagram as well. And she's just such a good soul that loves helping people.
Love
So
you.
yeah,
Thanks. Love
right.
you. Thanks for having me. Bye, guys. Bye.